Hello and welcome to the Blue Open Studio tutorial video series. The topic of this video will be OPC communication. In this video, we will be discussing what OPC means, supported OPC types in Blue Open Studio, properties of the different OPC worksheets, and we will demonstrate configuring an OPC DA worksheet, communicating via OPC DA, configuring an OPC UA connection, configuring an OPC UA worksheet, and communicating via OPC UA. We will begin by explaining what OPC is and how it was developed. OPC stands for Open Platform Communication. The original standard was developed in 1996 under the name OLE for process control. OLE standing for Object Linking and Embedding. It was created by an industrial automation industry task force. And it is a series of standards and specifications used for industrial telecommunication. An OPC specifies the communication of real-time plant data between control devices from different manufacturers. This could be HMIs, PLCs, temperature controllers. And after the initial release in 1996, the OPC Foundation was created to maintain the standard. The different types of OPC communication. There are currently 4 that Blue Open Studio supports. The first is OPC DA, or data access, and it's based on Windows COM and DCOM and is used for the exchange of data between software components. It's also known as OPC Classic. There's OPC UA, which stands for Unified Architecture, and this is a platform-independent, service-oriented architecture which integrates all the functionality of individual OPC Classic specs into one extensible framework. It's more popular in Europe at this time, but it is starting to grow in the US. It will most likely take the place of OPC DA in the near future. And then there's OPC.NET, which represents the continued evolution of OPC Classic on Microsoft platforms. It's based on Microsoft's .NET framework and uses Windows Communication Foundation in place of the COM and DCOM. And the specification includes backwards compatibility with OPC Classic. And then there's OPC XML DA. It's an improvement on the OPC DA standard and is based on the XML SOAP and Web Services Description Language, or WSDL, standards for web services, instead of the original DCOM or OLE model used by OPC Classic. It also standardizes the SOAP messages exchanged between clients and servers, which allows the protocol to be implemented on different operating systems. And don't worry about all the acronyms that are listed here. We will have links in the description of the video that provides additional information about what these acronyms stand for and what they mean. A quick summary of how OPC communication works. Let's say that you have several different field devices out there. It could be PLCs, temperature controllers, stepper motors, inverters, drives, whatever the case may be. And then you have your software, in this case it would be Blue Open Studio, running on a PC, be it a server or an industrial PC out on the floor. And you need to get the communication between the PC or the application and these field devices. Now you could do it several different ways with several different drivers, each device having its own protocol, or you could use a defined standard, which is OPC, coming from this application into an OPC server, which then will communicate out to the numerous field devices that you have. Think of OPC as a translator. Your software will only need to speak one language, in this case OPC. In order to establish and test communication via OPC, we will be using KEPServer EX version 5 as our OPC server, and the Blue Open Studio training application will be the client. So to begin, we will start up KEPServer EX using the administration utility. And you'll see on the taskbar that KEPServer EX is started. Now we will open Blue Open Studio, and I will go to the COM tab on the Project Explorer, and we'll start with OPC DA. So right click on the OPC DA 2.05. select Insert, and when the OPC worksheet opens, you will see that it is a similar layout as the other device or PLC communication worksheets. You have a header at the top with several fields, and then you have the body at the bottom where we enter in our tags. So at the top, there are several different fields we can configure here. The first is a description, which is just a descriptor for the worksheet inside of Blue Open Studio. The next field is the server identifier. And this is a drop-down list which will list all of the installed OPC servers that you have on the local PC. In my case, I have kept server versions 5 and 6, the ProFace OPC for Pro Server EX, and the Unified Automation UA Gateway, just to name a few. So for us, we're going to select version 5 of Kepware Kept Server EX. Then we have the disable and status fields. These are similar in function to the ones that we saw with the device communication worksheets. We have %deadband, which will allow you to add a tag in there to configure the percentage of deadband for communication with the OPC server. And then we have the read update rate. This field will also accept a tag where you can configure the interval for reads in milliseconds. And then below those, we have the remote server name. If the OPC server is not running on the same PC as the Blue Open Studio runtime, you can come here and select Browse, and you'll see a Browse for Computer dialog open. And then you can select a PC where you have network connection with in order to select that for your OPC server. In our case, it's going to be local, so we don't have to worry about configuring this. And then we have 3 checkboxes. The read before writing and read after writing, you can select whether you want to read the values of the OPC tags before or after you write to them. And then there is an option for accept tag name in the item column. And that refers to the item column down here in the worksheet body. And the worksheet body is set up similar to the device or PLC communication worksheets. You have a column for your tag names, which are the local tags inside of Blue Open Studio. And then you have the item field. This will allow you to point to a specific address or tag on the OPC server in order to access it to read and write values. With this checkbox here checked, what we can do is enter a tag name in curly brackets inside of this item field. And what that allows us to do is then it will read the value of that tag in as the item name on the OPC server and point to that in order to send and receive data from the OPC server. We then have the scan column with the 3 basic selections, always, screen, and auto. And then we have our scaling columns, division, and addition. So what we will do in order to properly configure this, we'll just simply add a description in, training OPC DA Kept Server EX. And as I mentioned, the only field we need to configure is the server identifier in order to establish communication. So now the header of this worksheet is all set. Now we need to add in our tags and our OPC items. So for this, we're going to add 2 brand new tags into the application. And one of the benefits of Blue Open Studio is that you do not have to go back to the tags database in order to add new tags. We can do it from just about any feature or aspect in the application. So for this, we're going to add 2 of them. The first one's going to be DA_RAMP, and we'll say that that tag does not exist. Would you like to create it? Click yes. Leave the type as integer. Change the scope to local. Click OK. We've just created a new tag and added it to our tags database. The second item, we will add DA_RAND. Once again, it'll say that that does not exist. Would you like to create it? Click yes. Leave the type as integer, set the scope to local, click OK. Now we have our 2 tags created. Now we have to select what items on the OPC server these will be linked to. In this case, we're just going to use static tags. So on the item field, I'm going to right click, and on the context menu, I will select OPC browser. What this does is brings up the OPC browser dialog for the OPC server, in this case, Kept Server EX version 5. Now, if you've gotten this far without a communication error, you have essentially connected to the OPC server. For our demo, we are going to select the predefined function tags that are set up in the demo application for KEP server. So I'm going to expand simulation examples and expand functions. And then for DA_ramp, I'm going to select ramp 1, click OK. And I'm going to do the same for the DA_rand. Right click, select OPC browser. In this case, I'm going to select random 1. And you see on this dialog at the bottom, it gives you the full path of the item name. In this case, simulation space examples dot functions dot random 1. On the right-hand side, you have an option to filter out the type of items that you want to view from the OPC server. Read only, write only, or both. Once again, I'm going to go in, select random 1, click OK. Now I have my 2 tags selected. However, I feel that ramp and rand are too close together, so I want to change DA_rand to DA_random. So first thing I'm going to do is close my OPC worksheet. I will save it first. Select sheet number as 1. I will go back on the Project Explorer to the Global tab, expand project tags, and open the datasheet view. And then for DA_rand, I'm going to double click so I can type into the field, and I'm just going to expand that to from DA_rand and set it to random. Once I hit enter, it comes up with a confirm global replace dialog where I can then select if I want to replace the entire application from the tag DA_rand by the tag DA_random. I select yes. Then it says please save to confirm the replace. Click OK. Now let's say I want to also add in comments for these two so I know exactly what they're for. So on the description field for DA_ramp, I'm going to enter in KEP server EX OPC DA ramp 1 value tag. And now for random, I'm going to copy that and paste it. Come in and just simply change ramp to random. Now I have a description configured for both of those tags. And as we mentioned in the using tags tutorial video, via the tag properties, I can now display the description of these tags on a screen through an object, be it a rectangle or a text box. So now I'm ready to test communication. But I am not going to add these tags onto a screen and test them there. I am simply going to use the database spy. So for the DA_ramp, I'm simply going to copy it out of the project tags, and I will then paste it down here. And to add the random, I'm going to right-click on the next empty field. On the context menu, I'm going to select Insert Tag or Expression, and then double-click on DA_random. I now have the 2 tags configured in the database spy. I will close my tags database, and now I will run the application. Once the runtime comes up, I switch back over to my development, and I can now see that both of my OPC tags connecting to KEP server are changing values. Now we will walk through setting up OPC UA communication in Blue Open Studio. For this, I will still be using the KEP Server EX version 5 OPC server. So I still have that running in the background. To configure an OPC UA connection, under Project Explorer, I go to the COM tab, and then I expand the OPC UA group. Unlike OPC DA, when using OPC UA, you have to first set up a connection, and then you have to set up a data group. Think of the connection as the header for the OPC DA worksheet, where the data group is the body of the OPC DA worksheet. So I will right-click on Connections and select Insert. And then we get the server configuration window. On this, we have a connection name at the top. This is no more than an identifier for the Blue Open Studio application. It has no bearing on the actual connection string to the OPC UA server. So for ours, I'm simply going to make it training OPC UA KEP server EX. And now under the settings, we have the endpoint field. And this is the actual connection string required in order to connect to the OPC UA server. There are two ways to enter in this endpoint. The first would be to manually type it in, or the second would be to click on the Browse key, which then brings up the Discovery dialog. The Discovery dialog is similar to the Remote Server Name Browse for the OPC DA worksheet. Essentially, this lists network-connected PCs that this application can connect to and receive information for what OPC UA server to connect to. Think of it like a directory. It simply gets the instructions and the connection strings from whatever server we select off of this list. Since we're connecting locally, we don't have to go through Discovery. We will enter it in manually. Since we do not know what the endpoint connection string is, we have to find it. And usually you'll be able to find it through the OPC UA server configuration utility. It will vary exactly where it's located based on what software you are using. But since I am using KEP Server EX, I can go down to the taskbar, I can right click on my icon and select OPC UA configuration. When the UA configuration manager dialog opens, we'll see several tabs across the top. And server endpoints should be the first one selected. On that tab, you will see a URL. This is the URL that we need for the server endpoint. So what I will do is click on Edit, and we'll get the endpoint definition dialog. This is specifically for KEP Server EX version 5. You see this network adapter dropdown. We can select our available adapters. For example, if we select default, we see the endpoint URL gets much longer. If we select localhost only, meaning we are running locally on the PC, not going out to any others, it simply enters in the home address of 127.0.0.1, and then the port number we select or enter in here. We also have the security policies below this. It is important that we have all three of these checked. And for the bottom two, the two basics, the 128 RSA 15 and basic 256, make sure these drop-downs are configured for sign, semicolon, sign and encrypt. Once we have those set, I will copy this connection string, click OK, and then I will come back to the server configuration in Blue Open Studio and paste that in. Now we have the endpoint configured, but we also have to configure security. So we will click on the security button, and now we see the security settings dialog. And the message security mode and security policy, they correspond to these security policies here. So back in here, with message security mode, we would simply select whether we want sign and encrypt, or none. We will leave this set to none, and the security policy then is grayed out. If we would select one of the other two, we then can select which security policy we want to use. But since we're set at none, we don't have to worry about it. One thing that we do need to do is create a self-signed certificate. And what this is essentially a file that the server will look at as authentication for this connection. It basically will tell the OPC server that this connection is valid and it has permission to connect to you in order to send and receive data. So we'll click on Create Self-Signed Certificate, and we see the certificate creation dialog come up. Now in here we can put in identification that we need to, the company name, the organization, the unit, the location, whatever you would want to use. Since we're only using this for testing, I can leave everything by default and click on Generate. It will then generate their certificate and place it in the config folder of my application directory. And I will click OK. We need to trust the server certificate, but before we can do that, we need to allow the server to trust the BOS OPC UA connection. But what we will do is once again go back into the OPC UA configuration manager, go to the trusted clients, select import, and browse to the config folder for our BOS training application. And we'll see the UA client certificate.der. We'll simply select that and click open. It'll now come in. It'll say my company with the URL, or URI in this case. Now it says note, at the bottom here, server runtime reinitialization is required to utilize changes. When you add certificates, the runtime will automatically reinitialize. So we don't have to worry about going into the configuration and reinitializing the runtime. So once we have that selected, we can come back in to the security settings and then click on Trust Server Certificate. And it'll come up and saying that this might be unsafe in certain conditions. Please refer to OPC Foundation documentation. Do you want to proceed? I click yes, and then it comes up that says Server Certificate is now trusted. Click OK. OK again to get back to the configuration window. And now I can test the connection. And it comes up with a message saying that the connection is established successfully. Once I have that configured, I can click OK. And now, and don't worry if it doesn't show up here, it will eventually. We now have to add the data group. So I will right click on OPC UA, and as you see now I just have this arrow show up, and there is my connection. So I'll right click on OPC UA and select Insert, and now we get the data group worksheet. This is similar to other worksheets where we have a header at the top and of course the body at the bottom. And here there is only one thing that we need to configure, and that is the connection field. So when we drop this down, we now see that our connection is listed here. So I'm going to select my training OPC UA KEP Server EX connection. And for the description field, I'm going to put in the same thing here. Training OPC UA KEP Server EX. We have the status and status message fields. In here we can put tags in, which will then receive the status code and the message for the communication or connection. We have the publish rate, which once again is the frequency that it publishes or sends out information. A disable field, and a root node or view. Think of this as the header that we configured in the standard driver worksheet. This is something similar. If I browse on this, I can come here and I can select a route to start from. So it would be a starting point versus right up at the very top. I am not going to configure that. However, one thing to note under connection, we have this advanced button. And under here, we have similar triggers and conditions that we had for our driver worksheets. We have the capability to enable or disable write and read actions, the maximum group size, synchronous or asynchronous read or write triggers. And once again, synchronous and asynchronous will fall into when data communication occurs. There's a cycle where it's a read, update, then write. You can use read or writes inside of that synchronous cycle or do it outside of it. That would be the asynchronous. And then you have fields for read or write counts and status, and also the messages. You can configure tags inside of these fields and have so many different options for establishing communication. So let's say, for example, that this is used to retrieve recipe information from a device, and you only need to do it when a recipe is being loaded into the system. You would simply set either a synchronous or asynchronous trigger for read. Whenever that tag toggles value, it will then do a read. Then you can do a count, meaning how many items or tags from the OPC server it read. And you can compare that with how many you needed. You can also do a status message, get that back to see exactly how the read completed. And then you have a reload trigger, meaning to essentially refresh the information. Then you have some checkboxes for enable bit notation, meaning if you want the whole word or do you want at the bit level. Ensure cache synchronization. This makes sure that the cache between the client and the server are synchronized. And you can refresh IDs on startup, meaning that when this OPC communication starts up, it will refresh the IDs on the browse path. By default, that's unchecked. Typically, they don't change. However, if you are doing quite a few changes on your OPC server side, it may be beneficial to check this box. We're going to leave them all set to default. So now we just need to add in our tag names and our browse path. This setup on the worksheet body is very similar to the OPC DA worksheet. You have your column for your tag name, you have your browse path, which corresponds to the item path on the OPC DA worksheet. Then you have your scan and your two scaling columns, and the node ID is the full name for your specific address on the OPC server. It's a little different than the browse path, and when we start adding them in, you'll see how those two differ. So just like with the OPC DA, we're going to add two new tags. The first one is going to be UA underscore ramp. Does not exist. Would you like to create it? Yes. leave it as an integer for data type, set the scope to local, and then UA underscore random. Type is integer, scope is local. And now we can add in the browse path. So just like with DA, we're going to right click, and on the context menu, we're going to select browse, and now it comes up with the UA browser. In this case, I'm going to go under objects. I'm going to find simulation examples, functions, and ramp 1. And you see down at the bottom here, it gives me the selected item, the element, the data type, the node ID, the value. If it's an array element, what element number it is. It gives all the information for the selected item in the OPC UA server. Click OK, and now you see the node ID show up. And this is slightly different than the browse path, but essentially is the same tag. So now I'm going to go to random, click browse, and select random 1. Click OK, and I've added that in. And you see the node ID has updated as well. And in the output window, you see the info that username and password not set. That is a notification that we do not have security set up for the OPC connection. We now have our OPC UA worksheet configured. I'm going to simply close it and save it as sheet number 1. And now we see that our data group for OPC UA appears. And just like with the DA, I am going to add in the 2 tags into the database SPI. So UA underscore ramp and UA underscore random. And now I'm going to go up and start my runtime. I'll come back into development. You see that the DA are already running, and now we have the UA connection, and we see them updating. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact ProFace America Technical Support by phone at 1-800-289-9266, option 2, or by email, support@profaceamerica.com. You can also visit our website, profaceamerica.com, for manuals, drivers, product FAQs, and other product and software information. Thanks again, and have a great day.